We have the great pleasure of welcoming our friend and longtime committed peacemaker Sensei Brian Joshin Burns from Breadloaf Mountain Zen Center in Vermont, Middlebury. I live in Boulder, Colorado, so I have an appreciation of living in a place that people generally refer to as the People's Republic of, which I imagine Vermont gets that moniker from time to time. So sorry about that. A call came in. I just needed to cancel that. I'm so happy that Joshin's here to talk about the work that he and the Breadloaf community are doing, community-based, activism and peacemaking, really, in our tradition. And I'd love to say that they're able to do all the work that they do because they're one of the biggest Zen centers in the country. But this is simply not true. I tease Joshin about being the little Zen center that could, and I'm always just completely impressed by the range and the breadth and the beauty of the activities that Joshin and his group undertake. And in fact, we were talking yesterday in a meeting. Joshin was talking about his 2023 schedule, and I believe he said they're planning 5 street retreats for 2023. One of which is in Vermont, but all the rest of them are around the country. So this is quite ambitious, and I think they've been very successful. So you didn't come to listen to me talk, so what I'd like to do is pass the talking stick to my friend Joshin and let him share with you what it is that they're doing up there in the icy north. So Joshin, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks. Great. Hi, everybody. Really nice to see you all. Also here in our Zendo, we have 4 or 5 of us gathered around as well. So it's really nice to be with all of you today. I know some of you and some are new friends, it looks like. One of the things I hope we get to do today is mostly have a conversation. So what I prepared was a few slides to just get the juices going, let you know what we're about and kind of what guides some of our work and where I'm coming from. And then I hope we just get to talk about, the things that are most interesting to you and what you're trying to do. And, if we can lend any of our experience to yours, it'd be great. So Jeff, thank you very much for asking me to do this. And I'm a big admirer of you and all that you're doing to keep ZPI going and working with the ZPO and your own Zen community. It's an inspiration. I've really enjoyed our friendship over the last few years. So thanks for having me come. Yeah, great. So can we unmute for a second and just say hello? It's always hard on Zoom, and I just like to know that we're an embodied kind of people. And so if we can unmute and hear voices at least and do a little wave, it's always a nice thing. So can you unmute?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hola. Hola. Buenos dias.
Hello.
Really nice. Hi. So how nice to hear real voices. This Zoom thing, I'm old, and so it's the old dog, new trick thing. It still feels new to me to interact with people in this way. And I find I have just admitted that I miss the old days of being able to sit in a room with people and seeing body language and all that goes into a personal meeting. And yeah, it's like an amazing gift that we have the opportunity to be in our homes wherever we are around the world and spend a little time together. And so this is wonderful. I'm so grateful for you coming today. So maybe I'll start with a little bit about, I'm going to do a few slides, and presume I can get the technology to work for me. Nice, so you can see that, everybody? Yeah. This picture that you see is what we affectionately call our barn dough. So we're in rural Vermont, and we have an old farmhouse and a barn that is not heated. So right now I'm in our winter zendo, which is inside the house. And in the summer, we're out in the barndo, which is like a zendo that's a barn. And that setup there is for our Gate of Sweet Nectar ceremony, when we did a kind of empowerment of a group of people who have been studying here at Breadloaf Mountain for a couple of years in a program we call the Infinite Circle, which is a training program in the practice of community engaged Buddhism. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, is community engaged Buddhism, and kind of what drives us and kind of where it comes from. So first, I just want to give you a little bit of a background on where I'm coming from, because I realize a lot of these ingredients have come together for me in the last number of years as I've practiced in this field. You know, and one of the things I really appreciate about Zen peacemakers is how explicit it is about bringing in all the ingredients of our lives. And this has been an important thread for me since I was introduced to the Zen peacemakers about 20 years ago. Just a word about how I was introduced. I used to run the Vermont Community Foundation down the road, which is a statewide organization that works with a network of donors and networks of nonprofits, and we try to move money into good causes. And I was there in the early 2000s, and in my first year on the job, I was brought around to meet, or other people were brought around to meet the new CEO of the Vermont Community Foundation. And one of the people who came was then the head of the Ben & Jerry's Foundation, Chuck Leaf. And some of you know Chuck. He's now at Naropa University. I think he's the president there still. But he used to run the Ben & Jerry's Foundation. And I was just coming out of a long period of working in the AIDS epidemic, and I was feeling a little burned out from all that. I had, as you see there, I used to be a Catholic. In fact, I was a Catholic friar for my early life and lived in vows from the age of, until I was about 26 years old. I was in a Benedictine monastery for 2 years when I was 18 and 19, and then at 20 or 21, I went into the Dominican order and went into a master's, a vowed way of life there. They sent me to divinity school, and the Catholic social teachings were very important. But by the time I reached my mid-20s, I realized Catholicism, the way it had been introduced to me at that point, was not the right world for me. And so I left religion altogether and my new religion became atheism and anti-religious sentiments and belief systems. And I really reacted against all kinds of institutional religion. And then I did AIDS work for a long time after a brief academic career. I did AIDS work. And I got to this point where I kind of burned out. And I shifted fields out of AIDS and went into community philanthropy. And that's where I met Chuck Leaf, who talked to me and met me and told me about Bernie Glassman. And I had already encountered Zen a couple times, but had rejected it because it always felt so cold or something. And the experiences I had had of it was it didn't feel warm and it didn't feel welcoming, that it felt a little uptight. There was a kind of heavy duty kind of OCD feel to it. And that didn't help me at that point. And when Chuck talked to me about what Bernie was doing with the creation of the Zen Peacemaker Order and the Grayston Bakery, kind of a bunch of bells and whistles went off in my mind. And I thought, that's the way I want to go. And actually, being a Zen peacemaker has been a fairly healing thing for me, because peacemaker practice is explicitly welcoming of many different, all religious wisdom traditions. I was able to do a lot of work on healing my relationship with Catholicism, and I kind of rediscovered many of the very important teachings I had received about kind of the social teachings of Catholicism, a lot based on the Beatitudes, a lot of the kind of preferential option for the poor, a lot of work around liberation theology. All this kind of came alive for me again. And that led me, so my Zen peacemaker practice led me to kind of a whole process of reorienting myself around religion and spirituality. I went to Upaya Zen Center because that was the only place I could see that had a kind of a more formal and structured training program. And Joan Halifax Roshi is a successor of Bernie Glassman, and I was looking for a place to practice as a Zen peacemaker, but also to do fairly traditional Zen practice. So I went to Upaya Zen Center. I became a priest. Eventually, Roshi Joan gave me Dharma transmission. So I'm a priest and a teacher in the Soto Zen lineage and the White Plum. And I also used to be the director of the chaplaincy training program there, which was really great because it showed me how to kind of roll up my sleeves and put to good use a lot of the kind of spiritual care skills that I was learning in my training. And as I mentioned, I worked in the AIDS epidemic a long time in community philanthropy. I always had a long interest in poverty and issues related to poverty. I also had a lot of interest, personal interest in the impact of poverty on families and children. I adopted 3 children out of the foster care system. We're now all grown-ups and we have grandchildren and all that stuff. But, you know, I was pretty embedded in these kind of complex systems and always had a question of, oh, why does it matter that we practice in a world as difficult and complex as this one? And Zen Peacemaker practice opened up ways for me to understand activism, social action, social service through the lens of a Zen practitioner. And I really appreciated that about it. So all of that's been coming together for me for the last 15 or 20 years. And it's been really enlivening. And I feel kind of, you know, motivated and to innovate and try new things. And that's one of the real values I see in being part of the White Plum tradition, which I think of as a much more innovative lineage in some ways, like, you know, Maizumi's teaching to Bernie to go out and create a uniquely Western Zen. And I carry that with me myself. I think that's really a wonderful exercise, you know, to really try to figure out how did this particular wisdom tradition with these East Asian ancient roots matter to us here in this context, these days, in this time. So I find that to be a very interesting thing. And one other kind of word on this slide I want to touch into is the new monasticism movement. This is another place where I get to meet with people who are rooted potentially in other traditions, philosophical and religious traditions, but who are really defining what we mean by being a monk these days. What does it mean to view the world as your temple and ourselves as monks in the world? How do we take the rigor of deep spiritual vocation and apply it to how we live our lives within families and jobs, within communities, in politics, and all the different things that we touch as people who are living full and engaged in dynamic lives and that look kind of normal, that aren't hidden away in a cave or in a cloistered monastery. And so this is another very important influence on my thinking. And if you want to take a look at a book, there's a wonderful book by 2 friends of mine named Rory McKinty and Adam Bucko, and it's called The New Monasticism. And it's a wonderful resource. I think there's a lot of overlap with Zen Peacemaker practice. So those are some of the ingredients and influences I've been playing with for a while. Jeff also mentioned that street retreat practice is important to me. And so I wanted to elevate this because we are talking here as Zen Peacemaker community, that this particular skillful means of street practice has been very formative for me. Part of it is for personal reasons. My father was homeless for a big chunk of his life. And so that's always been at a deep kind of personal level, you know, something I've had to grapple with, try to understand my feelings about and reactions toward the kind of limits of my own compassion at times toward him. and also the kind of opening of my heart toward a kind of very complex person living in a very complex environment. And so because I was trying to do a lot of work on trying to understand the influence of having a parent who was homeless and as suffering in many ways the way he was, and my own reaction to it, I was very drawn to street retreats. And so I did some of them, and then Genro, our good friend, authorized me to lead street retreats. And now I lead about 5 street retreats a year. My aim these days is to spend about 1 month a year out on the streets. And in the past year, you see, I went to a number of cities. I keep trying to change it up. This coming year, we're going to Los Angeles and Boston and Burlington and Chicago and San Francisco. Most of our street retreats are 5 days, and then we do a Rohatsu street retreat that lasts for a full 8 days. And I usually go out an additional day on one side or the other. So this has become a really important practice, a very informative practice for me to kind of keep bringing me into environments that open up my view, that open up my heart, that challenge a lot of my assumptions. And I remain kind of open out of that practice to see kind of what comes of it, what arises from it. And a lot of what we're doing at Breadloaf Mountain arises for me out of the process of bearing witness to life on the streets. One of the ways I've begun to frame what we're doing here is that we're practicing a community-engaged Zen. And it comes, out of the experiences I mentioned, as well as an observation I've had being in large Zen centers and in the Zen world for a while, that so often our conversations become fairly theoretical and conceptual. There's been a heavy emphasis in these first decades of the popularizing of Zen to create retreat centers. And I've wanted to do something that was far more embedded locally for people. So, we have this term in Buddhism called socially engaged Buddhism, and there's a whole vast literature about this, and we're very grateful to Thich Nhat Hanh and many others who gave shape to that concept. Of course, it's not a new part of Buddhism at all. Social engagement goes way back to the Buddha. But we've begun to understand that in the West in the last 3 or 4 decades in some new and interesting ways. And so I really appreciate that literature, but I've wanted to build on it and to take socially engaged practice and make it much more local and concrete, where we engage in practice action right where we are, right where we live, and with what we've got. And I felt myself a little conflicted about having to get on a plane and go to other parts of the world to do socially engaged Buddhist practices. I wanted to see, could we just do simple things right here, close to home? And so our focus in kind of trying to shape or give shape to something we're calling community engaged practice is to focus on embeddedness. What is it to really own that you are part of this community, and to get to know who's in your community, and to practice neighborliness toward one another, and to see and bear witness to where the gaps and cracks and differences are right where we live, and to have a practice that's committed to bridging those differences. And so here you see on the left some pictures. Those are 2 of my grandkids in there, giving the thumbs up in our food truck called Street Greens. So what we did with Street Greens, it came out of actually a time when we had a cafe. You'll see there, Breadloaf Mountain Zen Community Cafe. We had a cafe going, and then COVID hit. And that cafe was a free cafe. It was open every week, and it was a place for people to come together, have a meal. We had a number of principles at work there, which is we never served people over a line. We came and, sat next to people with 2 plates of food, and we would have meals together. Anybody who wanted to join in and cook or clean could do so. So we tried to break down some of the dualistic kind of ways of engaging, like I'm the volunteer here to serve you. We tried to break some of that down and just be together for a meal. So that was our cafe. COVID hit. We had to close the cafe, and we decided to start a food truck called Street Greens, which first functioned as a mobile grocery store. And when it did that, we provided food to people in communities that created about 8,000 meals in 3 weeks. So it was a big, kind of quick coming online of a new thing. And it was a lot of fun to figure out how to do that. We had wonderful residents. We partnered with a local Unitarian Universalist community. We had a number of volunteers, and we had everything based outdoors, and we just were moving lots of food. And we tried to make it fun and engaging and give people a little bit of break from their isolation. We also have an apartment on our campus, and we opened that up for end-of-life care for people who are housing insecure and also for transitional housing. So we had a woman in her mid-30s here who was housing insecure, had a devastating diagnosis, needed a place to be where she could do some reconciliation work with members of her family, a child. And we opened up the apartment, and all we provided was neighborliness. Like, what is how do we treat each other when we're neighbors, when we're in situations like that? And so it was simply being a community of care around this person, being ready, if she needed something, we could respond. There were other people providing direct hospice services, but we were there to be her good neighbors. And that became very kind of mutually satisfying, actually. It was a very deep and rich relationship. We've also housed people for short periods of time there who are moving out of the homeless shelter and into something more permanent, but there's a little gap, or people moving from one hotel to another hotel have come and stayed there. So we try to keep this part of our building just open and accessible. And our practice is to see who knocks on the door, because that's what neighbors do. We knock on each other's door and say, hey, I have something, I have a need. And so I often say here, our most important practice is to keep the front porch lights on so people know that we're home and we're here, and they can knock on the door and we will respond. And during COVID, there were also a lot of people in our extended Sangha who were at home and yet had this desire to be of help. And so we started a Zen Peacemaker quilting project where we crowdsourced little triangles from all over the world that people then sewed together. We now have about 75 or 80 Zen Peacemaker quilts that we give away to children in foster care. We have just had a request for us to give it to refugee families who are resettling in Vermont. There's a elder community here, kind of a lower income kind of elder housing community with a lot of people coming out of homelessness as older people and going into supported housing, and we'll offer quilts there as well. So that's been another really wonderful way to kind of stay socially and community engaged while the pandemic was going on. And our most recent project is opening in the next week or so, called Gather, which is a free community living room in our downtown. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, let's see, my slide isn't working. There we go. So I want to say something about community engaged practice, and soon I'm going to stop talking so we can have a conversation. But I wanted to give you some of the structures or the kind of capacities maybe that we're trying to build as community engaged practitioners. And this slide really comes from this 2-year training program that I mentioned called the Infinite Circle, which is a training in community engaged Buddhism. And for people who want to practice, be a minister of presence, we say, in their local community. So this is just kind of summing down, and I don't expect you to kind of hold this. It's a fair amount of information, but I wanted to make sure I touched on these points. Is that community engaged practice requires us to take on some tasks. And because we're working in the cracks of society, there are often people, in our society, the cracks are where people often are dealing with trauma and addiction and mental illness issues, this intersection with poverty and economic marginalization. These are big intersections, of course. We know this from looking around. We see it certainly on Street Retreat, that this is a huge thing. And we have to understand these things better. We have to kind of confront a lot of our assumptions about trauma and addiction and mental health and begin to see it differently. So part of our work as community engaged practitioners is to understand the power and role of trauma, addiction, and mental illness. The other is to be able to be a resource for people so that we can engage and support appropriate treatment to folks. So we can refer, we can be a place people turn to and say, I need something. And we can say, hey, here's a way to go. Here's a place to turn to. Here's a phone call you can make. So this is important that we resource ourselves. What is available in the local community? Who's here doing the work? We should know who they are. We should be in relationship with them so that we can refer people to them. Another is to provide people with spiritual resources that emphasize the healing effort. So much of what people experience is a reification and a reinforcement of what is wrong with them, right? That they're somehow broken, that there's a pathology. And many people who live in these marginalized spaces are often, they're known by their needs. They're known by what's wrong. And we think the spiritual space for people is the place that amplifies what is whole, what is complete, what is the potential for healing here. And then finally, the other task for us to build this capacity to build is to include the reality of illness and addiction and trauma in the immensity of our spiritual life. So this builds off of that other, which is that these are aspects of our whole lives. They're not the things that we necessarily have to get rid of in order to have a whole life, but this is part of our whole life, that for whatever karmic reason, this is what is here now. And we have to view people as whole. And that requires on our part, as community engaged practitioners, a shift in perspective often. Really working that edge of being able to see people as whole and complete and as Buddha. And so in our community engaged practices, our offerings, we use these 6 things that we're always trying to offer. This is what our practice looks like, that we're offering safety, we're offering hospitality, we're offering to walk side by side with people, we're offering listening, we're offering accompaniment, and we're offering gratitude. And you see there's some language there about what each of those mean. But this is really at the core of what I think of what a community engaged practice looks like. And so in our programs, this is what we're trying to train people in a way, if I can use that word, to be able to offer. What do you have to do in order to offer safety? In order to offer hospitality, to walk side by side, listening, accompaniment, and gratitude. So our latest project is this project we're calling Gather, which is inspired by the notion of a Zen house. And that was an idea that Bernie and the early Zen peacemakers had to create. Bernie was inspired by the Catholic worker movement to create Zen houses. He looked around the landscape and said, gosh, other religions are doing all this kind of really grassroots work. Where are the Zenis, he used to say, where are the Buddhists? And so he came up with this idea of Zen houses, that these might be local places placed in communities, and that each one had a different flavor, but they weren't these formal Zen centers, right? They were more accessible places of entry where people could experience a practice community. And so our idea of Gather, which is a community living room, is based on the Zen house idea. And what we're responding to is, the epidemic of loneliness that seems so pervasive. And there's been a fair amount written about that. So many of the challenges we see, and not just in rural America, but it's very true here in rural America. There's a lot of loneliness. A large percentage of our population says they have nowhere to turn. They don't know who to rely on, that they feel emotionally alone and alienated from others. And when people feel that way, of course, their health is worse, their mental health declines. And especially in rural places in America, there are significantly higher rates of suicide that among people who express being lonely. And so part of what we're trying to do in Gather is address the epidemic of loneliness by creating a space that welcomes everyone with really no barrier. And we're going in there really as peers and as equals. And I think this is a very important part of our practice, that we're not viewing people as clients, which is how they are seen by social service organizations. So we are not a social service organization. We are a practice community. And in that practice community, what we are practicing is always a Buddha bowing to a Buddha, that there is fundamental equality, and that we're not separating ourselves by how people are diagnosed or how their needs are characterized, that we're really seeing we are in a relationship that is mutual, that there's an exchange and a give and take in every relationship that we have. Like here at our main house at Breadloaf Mountain, our door is open. We keep the front porch lights on, and we will respond to whoever arrives. And that, I think, is part of our not knowing practice. It's part of our bearing witness practice, to stay very, very open and to work with what coalesces, what comes together in any given moment, on any given day. That we really orient our practice and we learn to be flexible in the practice to respond appropriately to whoever comes to the door. And so in that, we are not operating out of a strategic plan. We don't have fixed outcomes. We don't have very specific goals and objectives. We don't have a target population. We are simply an open space where anybody can come. And so we're trying to prompt the community by asking this question: why do we gather? And there are 1,000 reasons why we would come together. And we hope that this becomes a place where people choose to come together, to laugh, to be safe, to be acknowledged, to honor, to say goodbye, to grieve, to celebrate, to mourn, to solve problems, to be vulnerable, to be strong. That we practice in this way because we need one another. And that seems like a fundamental Buddhist concept to me, which is that that's the only way we awaken, is together. So that is my spiel. And I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts and questions and the things you're working with. There we have it. Open.
Joshin, thank you so much, and hopefully this stimulates some thought among our group today, and maybe you have questions or observations. So we have a nice group today. I can see most everybody, so if you want to wave your hand, that's fine. If you want to use the electronic hand down under reactions, you can wave your electronic hand, and we're all friends here, so feel really just relax, and let's have a conversation. I love what Joshin has presented, and that was a wonderful overview. So please, if anybody has something. Doreen, I saw you first, and then Jacqueline, I think I saw you after Doreen. Doreen, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, Graham as well is in the queue.
Okay, yeah, good, Graham.
Okay, thank you. Okay. My screen is strange because I can't really see anybody else. So I'm so glad you saw me. Thank you so much. That was such an amazing presentation. I have a question about how you let people know where you are. And I mean, especially with the Gather, that you're getting ready to open that up. And I just wonder about how that gets spread, if it's partly by just being there.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I worked in the AIDS epidemic for a long time, and I worked on the prevention side of things. And one of the things we used to talk a lot about was the power of social networks. And I appreciate that value. So what we do, my approach is to not be too heavy in self-promotion, but to kind of drop some seeds, to have key conversations, to invite some friends in, and then to let the network grow. And I've taken that approach even with our main place, Breadloaf Mountain. Like, I don't write articles for Tricycle. I'm not publishing a book. I'm not doing that approach, which I'm really grateful that everybody else does, because I get to learn a lot from all of them. But I feel like our approach has been to really try to create a social network that people feel drawn to step deeper into. And so we do some light touch promotion, and then try to respond to people as needs come, and let that kind of lay down the next part of the network. So an example is like the hospice work, like saying yes to that opened up a set of relationships with social workers, doctors, and nurses in the community that now know we're here. And so they will call and talk to us, rather than putting an ad in the local paper saying, we have a hospice house, we're taking a softer approach.
Thank you.
Yeah, part of that helps us pace the work as well. As Jeff said, we're small. We're very small, actually. And so part of managing our own resources, if I think of it like in the livelihood sphere, the Buddha family livelihood, that one of the things we really have to do is pace the work appropriately. And part of that is, I think, kind of working at the pace of what arises in a way, like at the pace of the next opportunity, and then to consider it,
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you so much. Jacqueline, would you like to go? And then following Jacqueline, we'll go to Graham in the UK.
Yeah, sure. I feel really, really called to this style of practice. Everything about it feels like home to me. I live in a community in Sonoma that was originally, when I moved here, rural residential. It's since become a bedroom community with lots of second homes for people from San Francisco. It's very, very wealthy. A lot of people want to do philanthropy, so there's needs are met in this community very, very strongly. However, I'm about an hour drive to Oakland, where there is huge need. And so I feel kind of stuck because in one sense, there's this, things are like overly taken care of here and things are underly taken care of here. And I'm not quite sure how to interface, how to make it into my practice, how to keep my porch door open. I mean, I've done it in my own actual neighborhood, we've created over the years a really nice ecosystem on the street. But I don't know. I'm just I don't know what my question is, but I'm wanting to somehow find my way into this work, into this way of being in the world.
You know, you raise a question that we raise a lot for ourselves, actually. It is, you know, in some ways I would say that you don't have a problem. Is there really any problem? We tend to divide up the world into, in all kinds of ways. And one of the ways we divide up the world is into the haves and the have-nots. And in some ways, when we divide that up, we obscure something about the truth of human suffering, planetary suffering. And it's helpful, I think, in some ways to have a perspective of like, yes, materially, there is a big difference, that the kind of material suffering that exists in the kind of communities that are affluent is different than the kind of material suffering that's happening, you know, in the Tenderloin, where we just on street retreat in San Francisco. We have to acknowledge that. We have to tell the truth about that. We have to understand the dynamics that create those differences. But that's not the whole of our perspective, I think. You know, we have to be able to hold the whole cohesively. It's one world. And, you know, sometimes I think of it like each of us are acupuncture needles in the system. And that we have to play, you know, we have a certain dharma position. We have a place where we are manifesting. And it's our job to look very closely and to understand where we are in the system, in the whole central nervous system of our world, and place ourselves with the precision of an acupuncture needle. So there is a relationship between what's happening in Sonoma and what's happening in Oakland. These are not two separate worlds. They are interrelated worlds. That things that are happening in Sonoma influence what's happening in Oakland. Things that are Oakland are influencing what's happening in Sonoma. If we believe in the truth of interdependent nature of things, then that's the view that we're developing. And so sometimes I can get into this mode of thinking too, like, oh, I should go help where really there's, you know, where help is really needed, that this place that I describe as a place that is unresourced, where there's poverty, where there's suffering, and that I can get into a way of kind of almost romanticizing that situation and think, oh, I should go in there like Mother Teresa, you know. But I think we're practicing with something a little more nuanced or subtle, you know, and I have to deal with it in myself too, which is, here's where I am right now. I don't know that I'll be here forever, but right now, this is where I'm at. These are the networks I'm involved in. These are the places I go shopping. You know, these are my social circles. These are the politicians that I'm electing. This is the library that I go to. And I think I try to open my perspective a little bit of like, what's right here? What are the ingredients right here? That, you know, may be put together in a way that cooks up something really interesting. And to trust that there's some energy that arises out of that. That's part of the ripple effect of reality. So that's how I begin to play with that. Now, at the same time, I would say, you know, we're all in a practice of like, how much do I need? How much resource do I need? How do I kind of equalize the resources of this world? I think that's another big practice inquiry and great koan of our lives. You know, what does it mean to recognize that all of our belongings are shared too? You know, what is that? If we were to really live that way, what happens to our lives if we begin to make the commitment to say, my resources are our resources? You know, what happens then? How does my life change? So I think there's a lot of ways to practice with this. We can certainly go to those places, and we should not minimize or trivialize the practice opportunities right where we are. And I think that's part of what I'm getting at with community engaged practice. And I know this personally, like I went through a phase where I thought I have to go to Nepal and hike in the mountains of Nepal and, do good work for those people on our planet who live in tremendous poverty. And that's true, it was really helpful. I went, all that stuff. But I did not feel embedded there, right? I wasn't, it wasn't deeply embedded. And I find there's something interesting to work with when I think about take that same impulse to really address human suffering and planetary suffering, but to say, I'm going to do it right here. Then what do I see? And whole worlds open up. So that's a long kind of answer, but that's how I work it in my practice.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Jacqueline, and for your answer, Joshin. And let's see, Graham, I see you still there. My friend Graham, if you want to unmute, and good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I just wanted to say, Joshin, hello and thank you. We have a connection through Jan Gentaku Modsha. We live in the same. We live in the same town. She's my Zen priest, and through her silent action group, I say hello to Petra in the Netherlands from time to time. So all I wanted to say was thank you, and we do have a connection.
That's lovely. I was just on the phone with her yesterday. As Gentaku Graham mentions, is we also do traditional Zen training here at Breadloaf Mountain. So she is ordained as a novice priest. We have 10 novice priests connected to us who are in training. And we're also formulating a new, because we are a disaggregated monastery, we're trying to develop a formation and training program that, again, kind of grounded in kind of some of this new monastic thinking of a way to support people on the path of formation and training, even if they live in very geographically diverse places and don't have an opportunity to come together to the Zendo. Like, my training was in a monastery, and every day we did the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And that's kind of Zen training. But we recognize that this world isn't aligned with that model so much. So what are the new models of formation? And Gentaku's part of that experiment. So it's lovely. She's doing wonderful work there. Yeah.
Thank you, Graham, and thanks for being here. Anyone else here? We have ample time if anyone's got a question or a comment. So on, yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone, and Joshin also. And it seems like it might be kind of interesting, Joshin, to say a little bit about how we're funded or how Gather, may be funded. Because I think it's important, that aspect of it also kind of is touched on.
Wonderful. So on. In full disclosure, So on is also a Breadloaf Mountain practitioner and is on our board and is one of our spirit holders here. So, he knows quite well the answer to this question, but I will share it with all of you. This is in the livelihood sphere, right? This question of how do we make it all work? And we've been very fortunate. It's interesting. Let me tell a little bit of a story first. So when I was thinking about getting something going in Vermont, the first idea I had, based on the Zen House model that Bernie had, was to purchase a foreclosed home in a small kind of city south of here that's been really struggling economically, is politically pretty diverse, that all went out. I don't know if that matters, but can you all see me still and hear me? Okay, good. That has a very severe opioid and overdose epidemic going on, and I was very drawn to this environment. And to get a foreclosed home in a neighborhood and to allow a neighborhood-based community to emerge, and it was interesting. There was interest, but the money didn't come together for such a thing. I don't know exactly why. Could have been something that I failed to ask to do or whatever, but that's not where the money came. Then it was actually meeting with Soan. Soan said, I really think the issue is we need a hub of practice from which people can go out and do these projects. So we took that idea, put it out to the community, and suddenly money came together. And so much money that we were able to purchase this building, this farmhouse, and the barn, and really establish a regular practice community. And in that model of the kind of social network, the Sangha has continued to grow and deepen. We've been around for 5 years. And through that, there's been a pretty consistent thread of talk here about service being the expression of our practice here. And so we've been engaging people over the years in practices that turn them outward, that this is how, I don't want to get terribly philosophical about it, but I do think one of the ways we experience boundlessness or emptiness, this kind of notion of a self that is all inclusive, is actually when we're in the service sphere. I think that really helps us a lot to let go of our attachments to a fixed sense of self and open. So we've been kind of always talking about that here. And our network has grown to the point where we have about 1,300 or 1,400 people on our mailing list without a lot of promotion, just through word of mouth. And as ideas come, I float them to the community. Like, here's what I'm thinking of. What do you think? And, some ideas never catch, the wave, and then others do. And when they do, there's often, and I never quite understand how or why, but financial resources can materialize. And I think those financial resources materialize partially because we try to be very relationship oriented. And so we try to engage people in deep relationship. We try to be very transparent about how much money we have, what we do with it, where that money is, how it's used. And trust gets built. And if we happen to be lucky that some people in the Sangha have a lot to give, and we also have many other people in the Sangha who give smaller amounts, that somehow gets aggregated into enough money to do the thing we're going to do. And I try to work within the resource constraints that we have. And so with Gather, I floated the idea. There were a couple of things. So this is in the livelihood sphere, like some of the skills I think that you need to have to do these kinds of enterprises. So I had to think through, like, how much financial risk will we take? What do I need to have in the bank to make it happen? How do I make the picture kind of come together in a way that maximize the opportunity and minimize the financial risk? And so I decided to work with very few donors on Gather, and to kind of knew their interests, and to ask them each to make a $50,000 gift or commitment. And each of them did. And so we have $150,000 that guarantees the renovation and the rent on the space for the next 2 years without putting our other operation, which is our main monastery, at risk, at financial risk in any way. So, right, I had to kind of think that through. And we wouldn't have gone ahead probably with this project had we not had those financial commitments. So Gather, we needed to have that money up front. And, again, we're not terribly strategic. It's like, is there energy here? What's coalescing here? And then we allow that to flow. And if the community said to me, hey, we're not investing in this Gather idea, that, you fold that into the practice and you keep going. It doesn't mean you stop the practice. You keep practicing and you see what coalesces, what arises, what comes together. How do the ingredients come together? How do a different set of ingredients come together? And we try to be flexible like that. So even going into Gather, I have no idea how if it will become financially sustainable for the long term. I don't know. And I think being in not knowing around that is actually kind of helpful. it opens up a kind of energy for me around it. And it's not like, how do we survive at all costs, but to really stay attuned to what's coalescing, what's falling apart, what's coming back together, what's reorganizing, what's disintegrating here. And, you know, to be in the flow of that coming together and falling apart. Things come together, things fall apart. And that's our practice, I think. So we get to see it materially. Is that a helpful answer?
Thanks for reviewing that, Joshin.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Let's see. Patricia, I think I see your hand.
Yes. Hi.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Joshin. I got very excited when you started talking about the new monasticism, because I always thought by this time of my life I'd be living as a monk in a Zen center somewhere, but I'm still in my home and it feels like the right place to be. But you sort of opened up a door for a new way of doing it. And I wondered if you could talk about that some more.
In fact, we're going to have a Dharma talk fairly soon with Adam Bucko. So, watch the newsletter for that, who's a new monastic. And I'm part of a group, a board that's looking at new monastic formation. And it's really just as I said, which was, as you discern the longing or the yearning for placing kind of spiritual formation at the center of your life, we have to develop systems and structures for people to engage in rigorous training in community with one another, but in the settings that they live in. And so for us, of course, we have the usual steps of, Jukai, and we've done novice priesthood, but we're also opening up a new way of thinking here, and a little apprehensive to say it because we're just getting started with it. We're starting our second cohort or group right now of people who will take on a rule of life that is organized around a set of practices, and where people develop through a process of candidacy, formation, and training, a formation plan that integrates their lives into it. Study, practice, service, community time, all this kind of stuff, in a way that suits their life as they're living it, within the context of the community, of the commitments of care that they have to maintain: kids, family, jobs, parents, et cetera, et cetera. But the piece we're building in is the structure. Like, that's one thing that's hard when you're disaggregated, is how do you stay within the monastic structure? So we're experimenting with some ways to do that, that include the creation of a formation plan, and where people take vows for 3 years at a time. And that there's a kind of a degree of accountability during that 3-year period. And there has to be an intention to re-up at the end of 3 years. Why are you continuing to do this? And all the time thinking of yourself in a process of formation and training. So it's important to be in good relationships with mentors, with peers, to have study curriculum, service curriculum, all around the 5 Buddha families. So we're putting that together. And it's again, an experiment for people who want to respond to what they feel is a monastic call in their lives, but are not living in the traditional monastic setting. Is that too vague?
No, it's a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Mm-hmm.
We have a bit of time if anyone else has a comment or a question. Am I missing anybody's hands? Tai-san. Thank you for using the electronic hand. That's nice.
Yeah, trying to be tech savvy, Jeff, but hi, Joshin. my friend and hopefully yours, Ekai Joel, spent Rohatzo with you, and we hang out in the Sangha together. And so I'm well aware, and because of him, I got to your website this week and am very, very curious. I'm hoping to connect with Jeff in the near future because we live not too far apart. But what you shared today that was most touching was the concept of the food with, not serving to or for, but partaking and consuming with. Really resonated in the connection piece. And I'm fortunate here that just east of Boulder, I can work on 2 ranches with horses serving military vets and first responders at one, and the other recovery and mental health. And they tend to bring out the best in us because they don't BS or judge. And that's the way they live and roll. But I'm curious about your retreats and also some that ZPI are doing. And I'll talk to Jeff about that. But I really heard clearly the importance of taking those skills and experience and then bringing them to your local community. Because certainly, we're inundated in metropolitan areas with needs. And I think opening up to those skills and understandings can make us better practitioners in our local environment. So thanks for presenting today.
Yeah, it's great to have Joel in the streets of San Francisco for Rohatsu. It was terrific. And I think for me, one of the reasons street practice is important is it forces me to let go of a lot of things. And one of the things it forces me to let go of is role. Like out there, I'm not Sensei Joshin. You're just on the streets. And I think this notion of embeddedness is really important for a lot of us. I think for me as I was going to say middle-aged, but I guess senior citizen, white male-bodied person, I've been really conditioned over the course of my life to be a somebody. And it's a trap, and it happens unconsciously in many ways, and sometimes consciously. We want to be a somebody. And I think going out to the streets reminds me about being, we talk about the gates of liberation, of emptiness, signlessness, and aimlessness. These are, I think, really important spiritual qualities for us to develop, that we have to remember what it is to be a nobody, which in some ways I think eventually we get to realize means being an everybody. And we also have to practice with aimlessness, which is to not operate always by strategy, by, what am I going to get? What am I going to change? What am I going to do? What are we going to achieve? To undermine, in some ways, the impulse toward ambition, and to just wander without a fixed idea of where you're going or what's going to happen or how you're going to get your food or where you're going to find a bathroom. Like really an embodied kind of wandering, embodied, not just a mental exercise, but to put it in your body. And for me, again, I can only speak from my own practice experience. That practice has relaxed some things that were, kind of put deep into my identity as a person who holds a certain position in our society. And it's been very, very important for me to have places to go or to just let that go and see what's there when I'm not going by a role or a title or a strategy or goal. Who's there then? Who is this? When we let go of those things. And I have found that to be a very important practice to return to frequently. So.
Thank you for that, Joshin. Anyone else here? Maybe while you're considering another question, I'll just make a comment. Joshin, in his community, does this kind of training for people, peacemakers, people wanting to learn how to approach their work this way. But as well, and this is not so much of a plug, but I just wanted to mention this. Joshin and I both sit on the leadership group for Zen Peacemaker Order, and Joshin has also done some teaching in the order. And I know there are a few folks on this call that are part of this now. But we have a 2-year training program for Zen Peacemaker activity, which includes much of what Joshin's talking about here. And our first cohort of students is about to finish their 2 years here in a month or two, and it's been really a wonderful process. We have a second cohort that began in October that will go 2 years. And I would imagine sometime in 2023 we'll begin a third. So, and this is open to anyone. I wanted to put it out as, it can feel daunting a little bit. I mean, as neighborhood oriented and sort of grassroots and personal as what Joshin is describing, it can feel daunting. How do I begin? How do I begin? And Joshin's trainings and the ZPO trainings, I think, are one of those answers. The other one is I think, as Joshin said, step out your front door and see what the ingredients are there. And so there's no question really in that. I just wanted to share that. And I'm not sure everyone knows the geography. And I'm not just trying to flatter Joshin, but I wanted to share this as context. The programs that Breadloaf is involved in, you might think, well, that's terrific, but you're in Boston and there's a huge population and great need. Middlebury is a town of 8,000 people, isn't it, Joshin? It's something like that. I'm sure the greater area is more than that, but it's
Not much.
not much. It's a small place. So, if you think where you live, there aren't the opportunities. I think maybe to consider that again. So, thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Lindsay, did you have a question? We have a question in the room here.
Oh, great.
You can just speak up.
Sure, yeah. I was just thinking about my great grandparents who my great grandmother was alive until I was 19 years old, and they, were adults in the Depression, and they told me stories of they owned a bakery and people would come and they didn't have money and just give it to them, or someone would come to the back porch and they'd make a sandwich, and it just I'm struck by how when they would share about that was just what everyone
That's
would
what
do.
we do, right?
And hearing you talk about this, and it seems just remembering as opposed to something novel.
I'm so glad you raised that. Could you hear that comment?
It might help if you repeated the substance of it, Joshin.
So Lindsay was saying that when she spent time with her great grandmother, she used to hear stories of how they would run the bakery and that people basically took care of one another in the neighborhood. And that was just the way it was, and now here we are talking about this. It's like something we have to train to do or something like that. And it just tells us a little something about shifts in society, or maybe even the way class plays out in our world. But it's wonderful that you say that, because I have to say the most formative part of all this for me is my childhood in Brooklyn, New York, where I lived in an immigrant community, a first and second generation immigrant community. And for all of my father's problems and alcoholism, in that context, I never felt like our family was alone or lost or falling through the cracks. There was, a lot of drama, but we weren't judged. We weren't pitied. We were met with care, and very concrete care. Like, hey, you need some help with the kids. Like, your husband's not around. I'll watch the kids, kind of a thing. When we moved out of Brooklyn into the New Jersey suburbs, then everything fell apart. And it was because there was no more social capital there. There was no more network. We became isolated. Your car went into the garage. People didn't know whether you were home or not. People were unaware of each other's rhythms of life and events and experiences of life. And there was a whole new layer of shame, embarrassment, connected to having an alcoholic parent and a family that was really, really struggling financially and not making it. And suddenly there was a whole new thing, fear, shame, embarrassment, isolation, alienation. We don't fit in here. Eventually, it kind of becomes a kind of aggression or resentment toward people who have things. It's like all the stuff came from that. And I would say that part of this is like, how do we reclaim the Sunday afternoon dinner table when the neighborhood got together and had a meal, and where we could tell stories about each other's lives, and we didn't have to worry about being embarrassed about what we've been through that week, or what we're struggling with, or what our kids are dealing with. How do you reclaim that? That feels really lost to me in society. I think that's one of the reasons why there is an epidemic of loneliness, is that we're so guarded around each other now, and we're trying to create a place where you can just come around the kitchen table. Like, it's really that simple. And if people say, I need something to eat, great, there's soup on the stove. It's like, there's no magic around that. It's just making the commitment to show up for one another. So thanks for raising that. Yeah.
Thank you, Joshin. I'm surely no historian, but I think certainly in American culture, this has probably been a trend since World War II, to be sure. But then we had the double whammy 3 years ago with COVID, and we were all that much more isolated, weren't we? So the need for this has probably never been greater. Yeah. We have a few more minutes. If someone's got a question or an observation or something that moved you that you'd like to share.
Roger?
Taigo, yeah, hi. From Oaxaca.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. So I just need to say, I feel as if I want to say this, but I feel humbled by saying it because I'm new to engagement of these principles, but I feel so much at home with so much of this, and what you've talked about, Joshin, makes sense to me. So I just thought I'd add, and please stop me, Jeff, if you've heard this or anybody's heard this before. When you were talking about how to do this work, you were very clear in saying that you kind of suspend your role.
You may have lost him.
Taigo, you froze momentarily. You may want to back up a little bit, Taigo.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure.
You froze there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in Mexico, where I guess we freeze quite a bit. Anyway, the reason I'm here is because Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, made a great movie called The Brooklyn Bridge. And he was asked by an interviewer, how do you approach making these documentary films? And I don't know whether Ken Burns is a Buddhist or not, but this expression struck me immediately. And as you were talking, Joshin, it reminded me. So he said, we always go out first with an open mind. We set aside our prejudices and our beliefs, and we try to, it's the tabula rasa idea, I guess, the open mind, the clear blackboard of of what reality might be. Then he said, we are endlessly curious, meaning we always are curious about anything that will fill this open mind with what we are experiencing. The third thing he said is we trust the process we're in. And we believe that this is a healthy, workable process that will get us the most information that we can find. And he said the last thing is we work with whatever turns up as a result of the first three. And to me, that's such a great appreciation for how to approach the kinds of things that you've talked about that are in many people's minds, mine included, I guess, is, that we're stereotypical in the way we look at these things, and we assign roles, and when we put names, and it's like the first thing strangers tend to do is like, well, what kind of work do you do? Or where are you from? And these are labels that and so what Burns said is what I think the Buddha meant in a sense, take things as they come, trust the process we're in. And I guess my last statement is that with all of that and listening to you, I just feel inside the need to say, I'm an old man at this point. And in a sense, there's kind of a sadness listening to you, Joshin, and other people in Zen and ZPI and ZPO, because so many years have passed when, as a younger person, I might have been able to do more work in this kind of thing. And I spent a kind of a lifetime doing things in service, but not like this. And so my goal is to find out, where is that Sunday afternoon table in Oaxaca, Mexico? And as a gringo, how do and how do I, because there are profound social justice and needs here. And so that's what I'm left with, is just, an appreciation, because I'm at a stage in my life where I'm not at the beginning, but I need to know how to begin something. And I'm really working at that hard in my head. And so I'm going to investigate your work there, and I just value ZPI, but particularly ZPO so much, because it's given me a sangha, frankly, of meaning.
Yeah.
And the sangha I first joined was a Zen sangha, in which it was there was not very much engagement, as it were, of the ideas, and I was very dissatisfied. And then suddenly, bang, into my life drops ZPI. So I'm very happy. I just want to say thank you very much. There's a wholeness that fits with what you've said to me, and I appreciate that a great deal. Thank you.
Joshin, did you want to comment, or should we go on to Martine and Martine's
Well,
question?
as one old guy to another, I would just say, something I would say even to a young person is don't wait, just do. And trust your life. I think this is what we do in Zen. And Bernie used to say things like that all the time, like so often we wait for the situation to be right, or all the ingredients at the right time at the right moment, and we can spend our whole lives waiting to be ready for something. And there's something about trusting that you're ready now. So do it and see what happens. And, maybe we don't have to have a lot of critical narrative around it. Like, we can just step in and see. And the other thing I would say is I really do think we work from, Dogen said something like, firewood is not ash, ash can't become firewood. We operate right where we are, with these are the ingredients of our life now. 63-ness is an ingredient of my life. I have to embrace that as an ingredient of my life. and I can cook with that. And I don't have to see that as a deficit. I can see it as a flavor. You know, and it's like shifting that mentality about this is, for me, you know, part of the deal. I think another part of the deal actually is to honor our grief around change. You know, like, yeah, things change, our bodies change, our capacities change, our health changes, all that stuff. And I think part of, you know, we live in such a culture that pathologizes all of that. And there is grief involved, but we can honor our grief and let that teach us something, let it open our hearts somehow. And I think, you know, like, okay, another ingredient, you know, the body's falling apart. What do I do with that? And how do I kind of grieve the loss of what I used to be, but also embrace the thing I am now? And I find I need friends around to help with that. You know, it's not something I am able to manage very well on my own. I need a community, I need friends, I need peers, you know, where we can kind of play with this notion of what it is to grow old and still live by what we really care about. Anyway, that's my little far too
Thank
long
you.
response. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Joshin. Martine, we just have a couple of minutes left. If you have something to share.
Well, I'll just be brief. I really appreciated your talk. We have a small Zen center in the Washington, D.C. area with small sitting practice centers and homes and so forth. And we have a lot of young people who want to know, you know, they want to do engagement. And we're so spread out. You know, I'm not sure, does the Sangha provide opportunities for this, or do we encourage all of us, young people in whatever age, to go out and do what's in front of them right now in their local neighborhood? That's what I heard you say. And I thought that was probably a good thing to start thinking about, instead of trying to do one thing here and one thing there, but maybe just open it up. And then the other point I wanted to just make is thank you for the why do we gather. I wrote down the notes because the epidemic of loneliness is really big, especially in a big metropolitan area. And we have started in our Zen Practice Center offering more sharing, more potlucks, more laughing, a little more warmth, because people are staying more. So I think that's very critical, but also the engagement part. So between those two things, relationships and engagement, thank you for opening my mind to like wondering. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martine. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. And Joshin, and thank you, Joshin. I was really touched. And this was just what I wanted to have you share. It was beautiful.